to this public seminar on evidence databases, evidence maps, and evidence repositories. On behalf of the Africa Evidence Network and the Africa Center for Evidence at UJ, we're really pleased to have you here with us today, that you managed to take time out on your Friday afternoon. And we promise to not take you too long from your well-deserved weekend. And we're really glad that you are joining us for these 2 hours, because we have 3 very esteemed evidence gurus, so to say, with us today. Harshad Ayal, Edward Kayongo, and Willem Fourie. And I will introduce them in a bit more detail in a second. And there's a few other things to get out of the way first. So to start with, I'm Lawrence. I work at ACE. I'm your chair for the day. I'm also the admin person a little bit. So I will give you the breakdown of the logistics just now, and then I'll talk a little bit about setting the screen. So on the slightly more boring bits, logistics. So if you're looking for the toilets, it is for the ladies. You go out here to the right, and then in the corner buy the snacks. And for the gentlemen, I'm afraid you have to walk a little bit further. So you turn to the right and buy the snacks, you take a left, and then you'll see the toilets there at the end. Also, there's no fire alarm scheduled today. So if you do hear an alarm, we shall proceed then in an orderly fashion, and we will take the left, and then we'll go down the stairs. But let's hope that it doesn't take place. In terms of the flow of events, so I hope you all had a chance to grab coffee and snacks. There will be coffee and snacks afterwards too for networking. So we will start for kind of each speaker has 15 minutes, and after that we have half an hour for questions and answers, and then we hope we have a bit of time to mingle and network and get to know each other a little bit better. And then I promise the last admin item is just to flag that we are recording this event. It's not live streamed, but we're recording it. It will be streamed on Monday as part of Africa Evidence Week, which is an initiative by the Africa Evidence Network that is trying to showcase all of the lovely evidence works that are happening on the continent. The screening is only taking place for the speakers, so be assured that in that sense you won't be shown. But there is people who are tweeting and taking pictures from our team, so if you do not want to appear in a tweet that has a picture, please just let anybody from our team know. So it could be Karina over here, in Kululeko, if you might raise your hand very quickly, or over there. So just let them know to make sure you don't appear in any tweets. So I think that's everything in terms of admin. So let us talk a little bit about setting the screen, about why are we actually here at this public seminar on evidence maps and all these evidence mechanisms. And so So I would propose a reason to why we're here. And we have a mix of people in the room. We have academics, we have government officials, we have knowledge brokers, and I don't think the speaker is happy with me here. And I think the reason why we're here is because we want to use evidence to reduce poverty and inequality in our respective constituencies. In South Africa, often this mission around reducing poverty and inequality is addressed to the National Development Plan. So you could say we're here to use evidence to support the NDP in its implementation and its design. And I think this is quite an important mission to keep in mind, the use of evidence for poverty reduction and reducing inequality. The use of evidence is not just an academic exercise, far from it. It's essentially an activist and empirical agenda to try to reduce social issues in our country. And in that sense, I think, reflecting on it earlier today, I think this seminar is very timely in a sense. I'm not sure how you feel, but just reflecting on the week that was in South Africa, I think we had quite a few rather depressing activities, from issues of gender-based violence to riots and xenophobic attacks in Johannesburg, and they do affect all of us to some extent. And I found myself sitting at my desk this week, and it was a bit difficult, to be honest, to focus on work with all these social issues going around. And I think it's in these moments where it's important to remind ourselves that we are in this mission of using evidence for these very social issues. We're trying to use evidence to reduce gender-based violence. We're trying to increase the use of evidence to reduce spatial inequalities, which are the issues that are driving one of the issues that were in the news this week. And so it's really on a personal level, there's a moral imperative for us to engage in this work. It's not a theoretical academic exercise, and it has a direct relevance. Issues of gender-based violence, issues of spatial inequality, we need to have good and effective policies in place that can address these. And to have good and effective policies, we do need good evidence. However, that's not to say at all evidence is coming to the rescue. I'm not saying that evidence will solve any of these issues in its own right. Evidence is not going to solve the long-standing issue of gender-based violence, but evidence does have a role to play in this process. It does make a contribution. And I would want to offer you three roles that I believe evidence can play that link it directly to the moral imperative of reducing poverty and inequality. So the first suggestion I would make which role evidence plays, it is around making policies more effective, making them more impactful. Evidence can help us focus on policies that work, and evidence can help us terminate policies that do not work. Gender-based violence has been a long-standing issue in our society. We have been having policies trying to address that. So we need to ask ourselves, these policies that we have, do they work? And what data do we have to substantiate that they work? Are these policies based on evidence? And are there other policies out there that could address this issue that we haven't tried from different contexts where the evidence might suggest that they're effective? So evidence can help us zooming in on the policies that work and that don't work to address social issues. The second suggestion I would offer is around evidence's role in increasing the transparency and accountability in the policy-making process. Society rightfully is outraged on the issue of gender-based violence, and President Ramaphosa yesterday responded to the nation. And without wanting to comment on his response per se, I believe there's a strong case to make for government to show what policies they have in place on this issue and to what extent they're based on evidence. So would Ramaphosa have been able to say, across our government departments, we have these 18 policies in place, and we have chosen these 18 policies because of this evidence, it would be a strong response to civil society. Even more so if he could be saying, we have 20 new policies in the pipeline that are coming, and they're trying to reduce poverty and inequality and gender-based violence in these areas. It's about prospective policies. This would be a strong response to civil society. And interestingly so, some of this data is available. We have the socio-economic impact assessment system in the country, which for each new prospective policy does assess the prospective impact on marginalized group, including gender and other issues. So technically speaking, at the click of a button, we should be able to say, across all these policies that are being proposed, what is their envisaged impact on gender-based violence? And with that then, support Ramaphosa's response to civil society on what it is that government is doing to address this very pressing issue. The third and last point that I will offer on this moral imperative to use evidence is around evidence and equity. Evidence can provide a voice to the often powerless and the groups that are traditionally excluded from the policy-making process. Oftentimes, remote groups far away from the centers of powers in rural areas do not have access to the policy discussion, to the policy dialogues that happen here in Johannesburg and Pretoria. Or they're excluded for other reasons, reasons of gender, reasons of ethnicity. And here evidence can come in and give a voice to these people. Take again the issue of gender-based violence. It would be much more difficult to substantiate the case for how grave and horrific the situation is in the country without the data and statistics on how many women are being killed per day, without the grave statistics around the pay gap inequality in the country. These statistics, these data, these evidence, they help us to substantiate a social cause, which otherwise could have been easily dismissed in the policy arena as just a feeling or an emotion. So here evidence can help us give a voice, support equity. So, but again, even with these three moral imperatives, I don't think the conclusion should be, well, we just need to produce much more evidence. We just need to increase more research studies, we need more data, we need more policy briefs. There's a slight risk in that, thinking that evidence will just come to the rescue, and if we invest in the production of more evidence without a proportional investment in systems to increase the demand and the capacity to absorb evidence within the policy arena. If we don't do that, if we just focus on the production of evidence, we risk coming up with something like a research firework, where we as researchers have now this pressing issue of gender-based violence. So today, Nkululeko is going to write you a lovely paper on his approach to how to reduce gender-based violence. Tomorrow, Karen is going to have a policy brief saying why Nkululeko is completely wrong in his approach and while her approach is much better. And then I'm sure the day after, Nolan will have a Twitter campaign showing why his approach is much better. And if you're a policymaker, this could then look like a reason. this could then look like a research firework. You're sitting at your desk, and all these academics, they all have great ideas, and they're bombarding you with it. Here's Lauren's studies popping up like an evidence firecracker. Here's Nolan's Twitter campaign, another firecracker. But do you actually know what to do? Can you make sense of all this information that is popping up on your screen, that wants your attention? All these studies have the answer. All these studies want attention. I believe it's quite difficult. This research firework is a problem. And that's why we have our three lovely esteemed speakers here, who have each in their own organizations found ways to mitigate the research and evidence firework. They have come up with tools and mechanisms to make sense of a body of evidence, to make this body of evidence accessible to policymakers, to make it relevant to policy issues, and, to be fair, to make it really nice to interact with, to have fun with the evidence. And so we're really delighted to hear from each of the three now on their innovative approaches to mitigate the evidence firework and to make sense of evidence bases. So we start with Prof. Willem Fourie from University of Pretoria, who is also associated with the Albert Duty Center for Responsive Leadership, and he will talk to us about the SDG Hub, a really, really exciting, innovative approach to make sense of evidence related to SDGs. So, over to you.
Thanks. I'm wondering whether, can you hear me? It's always a stupid question. If you can't hear me, you won't be able to tell me that you can't hear me. It's always that, can you hear me there at the back? And they're like, no, we can't hear you. I'm like, how do you know that? Anyway, can you hear me at the back? So, okay. Do you need the microphone for your camera?
No.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to speak like this. If you really fall asleep, or that's also okay. It's a Friday afternoon, and there's a clicker. So let me start with an embarrassing story, and then I'm going to draw a controversial conclusion from this embarrassing story. So the story is that I really can't play chess. The reason for that is my dad, when I was smaller, said, okay, he needs to teach me how to play chess. And then he said, well, it's easy. He first needs to show me what each of the pieces on the chessboard can do. And then I said, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I want to learn to play chess by playing chess. And he said, no, this isn't how chess works. I didn't believe him. And he was right. I still didn't know how to play chess, because I wanted to learn chess by playing it. I don't think that's the same for evidence-informed policymaking. And that's my controversial conclusion. I actually think that you learn to do it whilst doing it. And you iterate and you change and you update and you improve and you make mistakes again and again, and then you, here and there, you do things a bit better. So that's sort of the preface also to the South African SDG Hub. It started with a very simple idea, which turned out to be quite complicated. We said, the SDGs, that was just before the adoption of the SDGs, we said this new agenda will put really intense policy demands, research demands on policymakers. Let's just find relevant research and link it with the policymakers. And let's just do it on an online platform. So it's easy. We ensure that all the open access SDG relevant research is on an open access platform, and Bob's your uncle, it will work. Okay, now you're experts in this field, you will know that this is by no means what happened. But more about that later. Let me jump in by saying something about the SDGs themselves. So all over the place, people are using these three letters. Sometimes they mistakenly talk about the STDs. That's something else, different conversation. If that's why you're here, I would invite you to go somewhere else. It's the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals. The really interesting actually is it's also 169 targets that all countries in the world said, 193 UN member states said they want to achieve by 2030. There's more or less consensus that that's not going to happen, because these goals are quite ambitious, but they're setting a relatively high standard for what countries want to be, the type of world we want to live in. So 169 targets, more than 230 indicators. South Africa is releasing its first full statistical report on the SDGs in September. With a team from the University of Pretoria, we actually had the privilege of authoring the report. So I went much deeper into the SDG indicators than I thought was actually possible. So I can even tell you which indicators repeat across the goals. So if you know which indicators repeat, you're really a very deep SDG geek. Most people don't even know what the goals stand for. In any case, so that's the SDGs. And we said, as I've said, there's a lot of open access research in South Africa. Why not just link it to the SDGs? part of the logic is, and there was this, Lawrence referred to used the word equity. Part of the thinking was that much of the country's research is actually funded by taxpayers. But weirdly, the government then again often needs to pay to access this research, either because the research is behind paywalls or because researchers want to write those policy briefs Lawrence is referring to. And our question to ourselves was, why is this really necessary? Why should government pay twice? And that's why we actually looked at the institutional repositories at universities. Now, most of you might not know what a university institutional repository is. It's basically the dumping site of all research produced at university. And there's an agreement with publishers that even research that will be hidden behind paywalls, certain versions of that research should be accessible, open access, accessible on these repositories. So that's what we started with. And we put together quite a decent platform. Yeah, this is what it looks like now. So nice front page, and if you go to the database, you can sort of select SDGs. We started with a first cohort of universities, which piloted in 4 universities. You can use it. The point is, nobody used it. It was really a useless resource. And I won't say that a lot of people are using it now, but more people are using it. I mean, initially we were even sort of very ambitious. We said, let's make it look like Google, and we had this big search bar in the middle, and that's all. And then we got so many emails where people said, this is a useless website, you have nothing on the website. And then I always had to reply by saying, but have you used the massive search bar in the middle of the site? Then we spoke to user interaction stuff, people who know about how people use websites, and then they said, no, people use a website in a Z. They start like there, they look at the menu, and then they go to the middle. Let me go back. Then they go to the middle, and then at the bottom we have news stories. What we then did is we moved the database to that small little, you see the 4th one to the left, database. All of a sudden people started using it. Anyway, but still not enough. So then we started talking to our policymaker friends in DPME, DSI, previously DST, many other places. And then they said, you know what, Willem, we know academics spend their days reading emails, reading News 24, and then just scanning through articles, pretending to write literature reviews. Actually, that's not what we were doing. So for us, if we search for something, let's say maternal mortality in South Africa, and we get a list of 20 articles, we're disappointed because we won't even have time to go through those 20 abstracts. And then you're like, okay, this is now a bit of a challenge. So how do we solve it? Then we did 2 things. We said, okay, let's rethink our work streams. We said, okay, let's stick to this knowledge sharing, this website, this database. Maybe you have an intern that has some extra time, that intern can then use it. But we said we also need to experiment with more sort of demand-driven policy advice, dialogue promotion, and then we said we need to do some capacity building. So we sort of changed the whole model, and we said, let's work with both offline and online ways of engaging policymakers. And that started changing things. The biggest thing that changed was actually the way we viewed the policy-making process. We had to realize, and later it was actually backed up by evidence from research, that policymakers draw on different forms of evidence. They use research, sure, but they also need to draw on experience. They need to draw on the politics of the system. I mean, all of us know you won't get anything done, even at university, if you don't know who to call, who to ignore for that matter. And then the other thing they're doing, that's actually the 3 things. They draw on knowledge, on their political expertise, and their knowledge of the institution. And that started changing our thing, because we realized for this hub, the South African SDG Hub, to work, it needs to be based on dialogue with policymakers. And that's currently where we are. I think that's partly why Statistics South Africa also got us to help them with this national statistical report on the SDGs. And we started to realize that this policymaking process and evidence-informed policymaking process is infinitely more complicated and complex than we could ever have imagined. So we moved from the naivete of just dumping everything in a website to realizing this is a very time-intensive, in the end really rewarding, but time-intensive process, and we need to do different things, from capacity building to engaging policymakers, to just hosting dialogues, open dialogues, to, in the last instance, also hosting the things on an open access platform. Where are we now? We're now, again, rethinking what we're doing. So it's, as I said, we're figuring the things out as we're going along. And we now realize that strengthening our partnerships with ACE, for example, with certain units in the HSRC, really bringing the activities closer also amongst the actors who are active in the evidence-informed policymaking space is central, is key to making a success of all of this. So maybe our movement was from naivete to total sort of confusion in a way, to realizing partnerships, conversations with policymakers are important, to now realizing, looking at ourselves at the academic community again, saying, well, you know what, stronger and more productive partnerships with like-minded institutions might even be more important. So that's sort of our movement. Things will certainly change, and we'll certainly re-event, hopefully not the wheel, but our activities as we go along. But that's sort of in a nutshell what we've learned. And was that 15 minutes? Great. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Phil. So I'll also impose a mic. Next up is Harsha. I'll put the presentation on now. So Harsha, let's see, please, now in here. Official title is the Research Director, and that's from DPME. And
obviously, Prof. Willem is he's used to talking to hundreds of students, and I need the mics. Thanks. I hope it doesn't make this loud noise while I'm talking. Good afternoon. I think I really want to thank you for spending your Friday afternoon listening to us. I'm very, I'm feeling a little bit quite overwhelmed with what Lawrence has also given us an intro to. I have two budding gender activists at home, and they told me you have to, in solidarity. They were going to wear black today, even if their principal said no. So we are in all solidarity today with what's happening nationally. So I was asked to share with you very briefly what we do in DPME. And my colleagues sitting here from DPME will maybe understand how difficult that is. Just to say, what do we do in a context that's a bit fluid at the moment? So I'm going to try my best. And really, it's about an emerging service, and I want to just confer with what Willem has said, that basically this was an exploratory. That's why to share exactly what we're doing within a very changing environment is quite a difficult task. So just to come back to maybe going in and out of what inspires us, what leads us, what motivates us, then coming, so I'm going to zoom in and out and maybe keep you a little bit on a roller coaster as well. You know, we all know that in South Africa we have great capacity, and I think this is the essence of what we are here for. We have quite a lot of capacity for science and research, proven by the SKA project, most recently with this drive to a future city, the building of future city. We have hopes and aspirations, and we probably have a lot of confidence that we can do this, but we can't run away from this other reality. And that keeps bringing us back to the kind of things that's happening to us at the moment. This reality of inequality against what is our potential keeps bringing us back home to why we're not achieving some of the things, but we keep dreaming, and that's human nature, right? So in our context, and we keep having to remind ourselves where we're located. For DPME, for the research unit, for what we are basing this on, we are at a national sphere. But we know that implementation happens at provincial and local levels, and this is the interplay that's going to come forward. I think Willem had asked, so we do engage with a lot of evidence, but what is this evidence? And if you think about just the menu of what we have to look at, you know, we all know about evaluations of public policies and programs and how important they are in our body of work on what works. We have a whole team here also on citizens-based evidence and the trust in government from the first point of what citizens experience government with. we have the media, and media comes out with, and I think that we also know how much of the media plays in our understanding, in our influence of what's going on in the country. The development priorities, we all know that, but in terms of the visions, and we hope to achieve all of this, but how do we get there? There's evidence behind a lot of what comes up as, inexperience is what we need to do. The political manifestos, we know that those have to be kind of just not ideology, but actually achievable as well, but those are what we have to deal with. Then in terms of sectoral mandates, this is the implementation part of it. How do we actually monitor what progress has been happening? Now, this morning, I heard the Minister of Justice being interviewed, and he was asked, obviously with the hot potato at the moment, and he was asked about the register on sexual offences, and he admitted that the register currently only captures sexual offenders on babies, on young children, and on people with disabilities, and nowhere is it being captured on adults and women for that matter. But he said we need more research and we need the evidence. But surely there is databases, there is already that the police departments have to be capturing on the kind of reported cases, and we know what doesn't get reported as well. So this is the kind of thing we're talking about, right? We all know of the research evidence. But this is what we're concurring on every day. Every day. How do we actually synthesize? And this is the point of departure for us. We do not take one report, one piece of evidence into focus in the way we are wanting to report. Now this was the complexity. Is there a method to this madness? And that was our beginning question. I think we try and apply it on very broad levels, but on broad scales like this, we still have to come back down to our basics. You know that our role as government is to do this very high level reviews against our vision. We try to measure in intervals, but again, what do we base all of this on? That becomes not a question now, but it becomes a question of how much can we draw from what we already have. For me, and I think this was the reason we dived into all of this kind of information gathering, evidence gathering processes, is then what is actual policy relevant research? We see this getting thrown around in academia, in our different spaces, but at the same time, where do we find it? Who is producing it? How is it being used? And we know that there are systems of generation that we need to take into account. If we are sitting here and academia and ACE and SDG Hub is sitting here, citizens are there, how do we actually bring all of this evidence into focus? That was the question. So we've been experimenting, I think, for the past 5 years. We started with this experimentation process for a while, and I can honestly tell you, my team is sitting here, that we found a method that works for us. We took the 7 steps. 7 steps in trying to understand the narrative. That's where we will get a briefing and go through an agenda setting. We decide on the evidence that need to be included. We declare where we've searched, and the process is quite transparent. We extract and organize that. Our reasons for doing this is not just once-off activities. We are actually wanting to reuse evidence on a daily basis. We critically appraise for real inequality. What you're going to see is why I've been asked here is that we actually went into the process of mapping it, and then we have a whole series of engagements and use. What we found is that these are the strategic policy component. Once you get that part sorted out, these parts are quite easy, although that's the more labor-intensive parts. We do need our IT component and then the whole stakeholder component. But this we adopted from systematic review methodologies. So we have some of our experts, ACE is our expert on systematic review methodologies. Sandy is here from Epicenter from UK. We know that they have been critical in the kind of methodology that is useful for us to be able to adapt and use. We do not want to stray too far from this, and this is why we think that we found some kind of secret to this. We applied that, and I think that I'm not here to show you in terms of how we go about the research process, but we actually started to map it in ways that was visually presentable. You can clearly see gaps, you can clearly see where academics are keeping a focus on, because a lot of it is scientific research. And we want to tell them, listen, can't you give us research in these areas now because it's in the policy space, but we don't have enough of it. Can't you get more research generated through your masters or through your studies like that? We can now have quite a viable tool to be able to do this. Just a word on how we actually produce. We're starting to change the way government relates with academia, relates with the experts. We're not only wanting to outsource and at the end of the process get a report and then take what the findings are. We go through this, we matchmake government experts with the academics out there. We are really very engaged in the process, so that when there's data collection processes, we are doing it together. It's not just completely outsourced. We manage your mandates, we manage our mandates, but basically we know that everyone has different motivation. We hook our work around policy champions. Otherwise, what's the point of doing anything if you do not know who's going to be using it? Clear attention on governance structures. So we establish a clear governance structures with all the stakeholders involved up front, not at the end. I can talk at length on this, but I'm just giving you some of the glimpses. I think the key word here on strengthening healthy public practice, healthy, in the face of all the corruption that's going on, we really want to say that there's a clear way of how to commission out and use tenders in a very healthy way. But anyway, all our production processes has led to now currently 5 mapping exercises. And I just want to give you the scale of it. There are 409 studies at the moment in this base. In the developmental state, we have 50 studies, 167 there. We have over 200 data sets in the spatial transformation one, and the most recent one on land reform, 260 studies. Now this is massive. You can start asking the question, where do we place all of this? Is our laptops, our memory sticks, is our storage space enough? This is why we need some of these data scientists to come and tell us, how do we actually start doing the background to curating all of this work, and on an ongoing basis try to use it. This is what we are busy with at the moment. So what we found is that when we lift your head up above the madness, that actually evidence mapping is proving to be quite a useful tool, quite a valuable tool. And it came out in our most recent attempt with the Africa Center for Evidence. In the Presidential Advisory Panel report, this was the acknowledgement. The panel thanks the DPME for collaborating with Africa Center for Evidence on land reform. The database and map developed through this collaboration is a legacy that the panel hopes that government will use effectively in the future. We have all of this. How do we use it? How do we get to this point? So, just to give you a quick glimpse on how we started to use all of this, that we bumped into rapidly responding, which is what Edward is going to tell you about, because we were really, really honored to have learned of a service that's already been in existence. We discovered we have quite valuable evidence bases. We also have this demand from the policymakers. What we started doing is searching within those bases. We derived a sample of studies from there, which is quite possible for us to draw from the evidence base. We have to have quite a, if there's a, I think what Edward calls it, and I'm going to already bring it out, I really like this word of protected time. This has to help us get protected time. Drop everything else that you are doing. This urgency is needed like yesterday, and you have to produce something. So the findings are then sampled, and then we came up with some of our products, some briefing reports, briefing notes and reports, which we regarded as evidence advice. Stakeholder engagements, we brought it out into evidence sharing platforms, and a lot of internal deliberations in terms of what are we proposing in terms of design. So there was discovery for us that actually we can meet demand, we can give credible evidence, and we can actually come up with some products. Now we've had 3 days of deliberations with our Ugandan partners here, and we found that there are components of some of the rapid responses that clearly is there and is possible. And we started to don't have to worry about this, but we started, and thanks to Karen, who's making all of this a sense to us. When we get our clients, we have a request, this is what we do, and this is how we are responding. So it's becoming a little bit more of a standard approach to how we are doing it. I think as more and more as we are going into this, we realize that it is possible to have a service like this within government. So I just want to quickly glimpse you through. We still use this as our guiding light. A lot of you know that we use the agenda setting, planning, monitoring, and evaluation processes to identify the type of evidence we are using. But what we've advanced to now is the fact that when we're playing with all of this, we know that we are working in the demand space, but we are also working with a lot of our partners in networking. We are working in the supply-demand, but this is where we are positioning ourselves as evidence brokers. Trying to work within this, but so far, we are working as individuals. And when we are working as individuals, we can identify with each other sitting here. Are our organizations able to support us, taking us forward? And what is the institutional nature? Now, this becomes a little bit complex when you say, okay, we've come to a session, you understand it, but when you go back to your working environment, you can't put it into practice because your manager doesn't understand what you are doing, or your norms and standards in your own organization doesn't allow you to do this. Then you start becoming either part of what the organization's level is doing, or you leave because this is a situation that's not very conducive to what you were taught. What we found, and Pulani and Fafero is all here, what we found is that there's a way to institutionalize our approach now into the socio-economic impact assessment, and this is beginning to give us some kind of not just use, and I think the use becomes a bit of a theoretical word. It's actually giving the kind of cabinet requirement for every government department to go through a SEAS process, which is very heavily dependent on evidence. But how do you bring that evidence into the picture? That's the part that we are bringing in this evidence support, and we are really practicing it into it, and we are showing that it's possible based on all the information I've given you as to how we are able to do it. And this seems to be the future of how we can make and ensure all of government responses are evidence-based, evidence-informed, and the way that they are going to be searching for information is going to be a credible process. But I'll leave you with this one question at the end, and I think that on a Friday afternoon it's quite a difficult one, but it's an ongoing one. What is government's absorptive capacity? What is government's absorptive capacity? If all of us sitting here are interested in the fact that we are wanting to generate and use evidence to inform decision policymaking, but we keep asking ourselves that policymakers must do this, policymakers must reach. We still haven't cracked the absorptive capacity, and that is a bit of the black box situation for me at the moment. So sorry, I think I took up too much time, but this is one. Can I switch this off?
Thank you very much. much for that, Harsha. My apologies for the sound. I think we'll be able to move ahead without the mic. So next on our agenda, we've got Edward Kanyongo from the Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis. And it is really the Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis. To give a bit of background, he's coming all the way from Uganda, and there's this amazing team that for the last 10 years has been piloting rapid responses. And it's a team that probably is the longest standing rapid response team anywhere in the world. Before any global north, before the Germans, before the Americans, they have been doing rapid responses. They have cracked a model that works amazingly. And I think, yeah, last year, for the very first time, we came to South Africa, and Edward's team started to train us on how to do rapid evidence synthesis. And so we were really, really pleased to hear from Edward, from the amazing work that they've been doing in Uganda, which since then has been going around the world. So Edward and his colleagues are really busy people. Like one day they're in Georgia, the next day they're in Lebanon. They're training all over the world. So we're really, really happy to have you here. You've trained us again for a second time earlier this week, so we're really delighted. And with that, yeah, over to you, Edward. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon to everyone here today. I really want to thank everyone for sparing their time today afternoon to come and sit here for this session. It is quite amazing the number of people are interested in evidence. It's so amazing and so empowering. I come from Arcadia University, the Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis. I'm a research scientist there. As Lorenz has mentioned, rapid evidence work has been ongoing for the last about 10 years in Uganda. We've supported several policy processes through this kind of model. The model has gone through several iterations and several learning processes to the extent that I can't say we've perfected it, but we keep on learning from the work we are doing. The issue about knowledge translation, it is a relatively new field. We can't really say it is that old. So everyone who is involved in knowledge translation, from SCE to SDG Hub, to everyone who is seated in here, Africa Evidence Network, everything we do on knowledge translation and use of evidence to inform policy decision making is a learning process. You interact with the researchers, interact with the policy makers, understand policy makers' needs, appreciate what you bring to the table, you keep learning and improving the process. Hopefully at some point in time we shall be able to draw a conclusion that we know exactly what works. But for now, we are still going through the learning process. So I'm going to take us through work we do in Makerere University under ACAS, and we are hoping this can be adopted in other centers across Africa and the world at large. So we decided to start off the presentation by quoting Sir William Bragg, who mentioned that the important thing in science is not so much to obtain new facts as to discover new ways of thinking about them. So this takes us to the discussion I've just had earlier on. Research has always been done. Policymakers have always been done. Policymakers have always made decisions, whether using evidence or not. No one knows. However, if you think about the role researchers are playing and the role policymakers are playing, and you try to bring these together, these are not new facts. They are things that have been existing forever. However, we are trying to think about how best can we actually work this out. We keep iterating new methods. We keep thinking about how best to supply to meet the policymakers' needs. And that is where all of us in this room probably will fall into that place, using evidence to inform decision making. So the presentation, we are going to focus a lot on rapid response service. EIPM is evidence-informed policy making. We shall share the model we use in Uganda, and then we shall also talk about the experiences at the national and the sub-national level. It is quite interesting. Very different experiences at the national level and the sub-national level. Basically, simply because at the national level, they set policy, at the sub-national level, very little policy is set. It's more or less implementation. So evidence needs are very, very different. And now you're going to assess the impact of the evidence you've provided at both national and sub-national levels is totally different. So, what do we know about knowledge translation to date? This is the slide. So, researchers appreciate there is a need for their evidence to get into the decision-making arena. But they do not really understand the policy-making arena. They do not know what happens when decisions are being made. So they can't be relevant to the policymaker. The policymakers know research is out there, but they have several barriers that hinder them from tapping into the evidence, into the research that has been undertaken. However, positive bit is, slowly but surely, an increasing number of people who are practicing knowledge translation is actually growing on the African continent. This number, the progress is quite slow. Knowledge translation has been going on the African continent for about 10-15 years. Yeah? But you can imagine how many people in South Africa involved in knowledge translation. In Uganda, most of the knowledge translation is in Arcadia University. ECAS, SPEED in School of Public Health. Some work is being done at UCU, another university in Uganda, but still for the last 15 years, if you haven't really built that much interest, something is going wrong somewhere. However, it is a positive. Numbers are growing. Slowly but surely we shall get there. So, the reasons as to why less get is happening in low and middle income countries, there is a lack of the political will, the economy is really not doing well. Asha mentioned protected time. If you're going to have a knowledge translation service, you need time to actually execute this service. That time comes along with finances. Who is going to finance knowledge translation work if people within government do not appreciate knowledge translation, do not appreciate the use of evidence? You're going to base so much on funders. If funders' priorities shift, what happens? Who knows? These are things we have to think about. Scientific institutions and procedures are still lacking in support of knowledge translation. A lot of primary research is produced by so many students and researchers within universities. Almost every science course in a university for master's level, a student has to produce a research work. They'll have to do some form of dissertation. All that research is packaged somewhere. He mentioned they went to university and tried to bring out this research. Yeah? However, he also mentioned they brought this research together, people are not using it. What is wrong? Still challenges in Africa. So, this picture shows more or less a government institution, but you can think about it as evidence, as research that has been collected out there. This research could be M&D reports produced from DPME, for example. It could be university research documents. It could be media reports. They are also sources of evidence. All that is disorganized. You expect a policymaker to make a decision. How are they going to sift through all that to draw a conclusion on the best way forward? It is practically next to impossible. In case a policymaker is really interested, and probably pick out 1, 2, 3 documents from all that confusion there, will they be able to actually read and appreciate and understand the science you're communicating, the humanities work you've done, a lot of interviews you've come up with and you've drawn a conclusion depending on how you've understood that topic. Will the policymaker have the same appreciation as the researcher, depending on how you've written? It is next to impossible. So that becomes another barrier. Governments, different government institutions are recently coming up with research agendas. However, there is still a very big disconnect between universities and government institutions. Universities are going to produce research basing on the professor, the university, the students' interest and the like. Policymakers have another interest for policy, for research. So at the end of the day, you're going to find that research is going to be produced, but it might not be relevant to the policymaker. How do you link that to work and ensure that research being done at the university is actually relevant to the policymaker? Those are things you have to think about, the barriers that are actually preventing the use of evidence. There we are seeing a gentleman running after a train. It's impossible for him to get in. The train has already set off. Sometimes policymakers have very limited time to make a decision. Very, very limited time. Today they are seated in the cabinet meeting somewhere in State House, discussing very important things, and the president comes up with something and is like, can you actually try and conclude this in the next 1 month? I need this information, I need to take a decision on the way forward. For example, the gender-based violence that has been happening in South Africa. I imagine the president has tasked someone within cabinet to come up with a solution of sorts. Yeah. So how much time does that individual have to take to actually come up with the information and inform the president on the best way forward? Very limited time. You cannot commission primary research. You have to use available evidence, research that has already been undertaken. But given all these other barriers, how do you expect that individual to go forward? Becomes practically next to impossible, and they'll end up using intuition rather than evidence. And if you don't use evidence to form policy making decisions, you'll actually find there is a lot of wastage. You keep on trying many things. Some will work, others won't work. Chances are high that many won't work. You waste resources, and at the end of the day, you are back at the same point you started from. So, after appreciating that we want KT services, knowledge translation services, to actually be performed within a country, the question is, whose role is it? Should we task the university, the researchers at the universities to do KT? Should we ask someone in government to do KT? We do not know. So this is where the knowledge brokers come in. Yeah. So you will have the researcher on this side, you will have the policymaker on this side, then you need someone in the middle to link that two up. This person in the middle will be the different people who are interested in knowledge translation, who are actually going to sift through the available evidence, synthesize it, make it available to the policymaker in the easiest language possible for the policymaker to do something from it. Forget about all the complicated p-values and confidence intervals and the like. Just put it out there. This works, this does not work. As simple as that. Give this information to the policymaker, and let the policymaker take a decision. So, at this juncture, probably we should define knowledge translation. This definition is drawn from health, because most of the knowledge translation work started in health, so the working definitions are still more or less leaning towards health. However, a lot of work is now moving to the humanities side. So, knowledge translation is defined as a process which is either iterative, that includes synthesis, dissemination, exchange, and ethically sound application of knowledge translation to improve whichever system you are working in, whichever sector you are in. Let's begin our health. So the major points here are, you're going to synthesize the evidence. There is research out there, you're going to dwell into these papers, these publications, and pull out the information that the policymaker needs. The process has to be ethically sound. Whoever it is that is doing knowledge translation has to leave their biases out of the work. Do not input the biases when you're actually informing the health worker. Sorry, when you're informing the policymaker. The other issue about ethically sound principles, whatever product you do in knowledge translation, we would advise put it in open domain. Let it be accessible to almost everyone who is interested in this particular product. That way, you will actually be forced to produce the best product you can as a service. It will protect you from so many biases, and it gives the opportunity for people to read and put whoever it is that needed the evidence on task to use the evidence. So you'll get a lot of criticism when you put these products out there in the public domain. So in order to protect yourself from such criticisms, it is very crucial you do a good job. So that's what you have to think about when it comes to ethical sound application of knowledge. So knowledge translation is still growing, and people are still thinking about what is the best skill set you would need an individual who is undertaking knowledge translation to have. What is the best knowledge this individual would have? Yeah? What barriers are out there that are blocking knowledge translation, the use of evidence? So whoever it is that is involved in KT, you still have, should I say, an opportunity of career advancement. If you are in a university, you can grow your career as a professor, as a researcher, whatever. There is a lot that can be done on KT. Nothing is written in stone. There is a lot of learning still to be done. So, what strategy of KT do you want to choose? Yeah. we have evidence maps. We have the SDG Hub, which is producing a lot of evidence and bringing it out there. We have DPMP, which is using evidence maps and incorporating so many other strategies of knowledge translation, including policy dialogues and the like. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to choose an option you're going to go for. This should be relevant to the policymakers you are addressing. For us in Makerere, we chose Rapid Response Service. So the Rapid Response Service tries to avail the best available evidence to the policymaker in a timely manner, direct response to an urgent need, contextualized and packaged in a language that the policymaker would understand. Best available evidence. When a policymaker comes up with a policy question, I am expected to go into searching and actually come up with all the available evidence that is out there. Read all the evidence, appraise the evidence, comment about the quality of the evidence that I'm going to provide to the policymaker. I should do this within a given time span. The policymaker's need for evidence, if he comes to me and tells me I need the evidence in 1 week, I should be in position to respond within that 1 week. If I fail to do so, I'm irrelevant to the policymaker. By the time I supply the evidence, the decision has already been taken. So it has to be timely. Contextualize. A lot of times you'll find that evidence you need to inform a policy decision is not coming from your own country, is not coming from your own region. I might need evidence to inform a decision in Cape Town, for example, but the research that is available is coming from Johannesburg. Yeah? In order for me to be relevant to the policymaker, I have to contextualize what was done in Johannesburg to the case of Cape Town. Otherwise, I will provide this evidence. If I don't contextualize, the policymaker will implement the evidence and won't get the results. So you've practically not helped the policymaker. You have to contextualize this evidence. So the model that is used at Makerere is what I'm going to present next. So it starts off with a scope. So initially this was the scope we are working with at Makerere. It was majorly within health. So we started off with financing, governance, delivery arrangements, and organization arrangements. That's what we started off with. However, as the service grew, we actually realized a lot of questions are coming in from health technologies assessments. So we had to include health technologies assessment under the scope. Currently, we've expanded to education and gender. Our scope in terms of time is 28 days. We have to respond within 28 days. So a policymaker's need for evidence, in Makerere, we define it as urgent if the information is needed within 28 days. If the information is needed past 28 days, we are afraid we cannot respond to that question because to us that is not urgent need for evidence. So the rapid response service is highly demand driven. You have a policymaker who is calling in with a specific question for evidence. So the policymaker calls the service. We go through a process of question clarification where we discuss with the policymaker and try to focus their questions. It is not common for a policymaker to have a problem, but they cannot clearly put it out there. They know the problem exists, but how to focus it and make the problem make sense is sometimes a problem for them. So we go through the process of question clarification, try to focus that question so that it can be turned into a question that can easily be responded to. So after you clarify the question, we develop a search strategy. We search for the evidence, we appraise the evidence, summarize the evidence, and come up with a rapid response brief. We send the brief to a reviewer. Picture there represents a reviewer. We send a brief to a reviewer who is supposed to check what we've written, confirm whether we've exhausted the evidence that is out there, whether there is no bias within what we've written, and give a general comment about the flow of the work, whether there is something we need to include that we've excluded, or whether there is crucial evidence that we left out. The evidence that could have been left out typically comes from grey literature. If you did not do an extensive search for literature, you often miss out the grey literature. That is where the reviewer helps you. They will help you identify grey literature, which you would actually have to include within the brief. So when the reviewer has finished reviewing the brief, they send it back to the service. We review that, we go through the reviewer's comments as a team, change the policy brief as needed. You do not necessarily have to incorporate all the comments. As a team, you sit down, discuss, and see which comments have to be included or those that have to be excluded. After you're done, you're going to come up with your brief, send it back to the policymaker. That is the model you follow. All this has to be done in response to an urgent need for evidence within that time the policymaker actually needs this evidence. So, how does that service fit in with the previous speaker's words? When it comes to evidence maps, if you already have a map, for example, in place, your search for evidence is quite simple. You are not starting from scratch. Yeah. You already have something in place which you are going to work with. If you have someone located within a government institution, for example, and you need to address a question, that individual would help you identify evaluation reports, field reports, and things like that, which would help beef up your evidence or help you contextualize much better. So, however, if you don't have all those things, you really have to go to scratch. Do a full search strategy, search for the evidence extensively, comprehensively, and respond. So, the rapid response service, the model we use in Makerere, it has inbuilt mechanisms to assess satisfaction from the policymaker's side. At the end of the service, I have a delayed follow-up form, which I go and have a discussion with the policymaker and ask whether we are relevant, did we meet their needs, is there anything that they feel we need to change. Yeah? So it helps you assess satisfaction and become more relevant to the policymaker, assess immediate and delayed outcomes of the use of evidence, compare before and after the rapid response brief was actually given to the policymaker. Typically, by the time the policymaker comes to you with a policy question, they have a course of action in their mind. They think, I'm going to do ABC. But when you provide this evidence, that course of action might be reaffirmed that it is the best course of action, or it might be changed. So, when you go to discuss with the policymaker after you provided that evidence, it gives you the opportunity to find out, did we actually affirm what the policymaker wanted to do, or did the policymaker change their mind after reading the policy brief that we supplied? So get immediate feedback on the products and services, and all our rapid response briefs are in open domain. Currently, our website is under construction. However, the rapid response briefs can be accessed if you go to Makerere University and check for the clearinghouse. You will find the rapid response briefs there. The website can be tricky to navigate. You can just Google Makerere University clearinghouse. It will most probably lead you to where the rapid response briefs are. Otherwise, we are going to try and make the rapid response briefs more accessible. We are constructing another website which will be strictly for this, so that you don't have to go through the entire hassle of navigating the Makerere University web page. So, the model used in Makerere is what I've just presented. However, there are other models that have been used elsewhere. There are other models that have been used elsewhere. There are several reasons as to why you would choose different models. So, in some places, individuals identify links of the required evidence and send these links to the policymaker who came up with that question. That one has a downside to it. You are not sure whether the policymaker will read all the links. You are not sure whether the policymaker will understand what they've read. However, it has worked in the developed countries because policymakers there read a lot. We do not know the case for our policymakers in the lower developed countries. In some places, they appraise the literature and provide the summary of the evidence. Others go ahead and include external reviewers who review and they incorporate the comments. Then, in Makerere, we are going a step further for the last model. After we supply this rapid response, sometimes you find you need a policy dialogue to further draw on the tacit knowledge from different policymakers within the field. So we go ahead and hold policy dialogues. We are currently trying out a citizen panel for some strategies that actually you find you need citizens buy-in. You need to understand what the citizens think about the available evidence and the strategies or options you're actually providing with a policymaker. So we've now expanded the service from policy dialogues to citizen panels so that you can draw further information from the citizens, because at the end of the day, all these policies and decisions are going to affect the citizens. Okay, so this is an example of how the rapid response service and interaction with policymakers on the service actually can impact a policymaker's attitude. So this particular policymaker, when first we interacted with the policymaker at first, the policymaker had a negative attitude towards the use of evidence. That was his comment. I told you, for me, I'm skeptical, because when you ask, research can be interpreted in many ways depending on who you ask and what their motive is. So for me, really, I don't know. This is typical when you are using primary studies. If I did a study, for example, in sickle cells, and I want to push for a particular drug in sickle cell, and you happen to contact me for the policy direction when it comes to managing sickle cell, chances are high I'll push for my evidence. Yeah? So you can't blame that policymaker for thinking like that. However, the service we are providing was knowledge translation, and after providing the service, the policymaker a year later said, oh, that one chuckles a bit. It's better about it because you people give me everything. You are neutral, maybe because it is not your research. You look for everything, but maybe the researcher will give me only this. I feel this idea, I like this idea that you are doing, that is why I am coming to you for more evidence. Do other people actually know about you? That was the policymaker a year after actually engaging him in the service. So this is when you provide KT services and continue engaging the policymaker, you can actually change their attitudes towards evidence, towards the use of evidence, and such individuals in the long run become champions for the service. They introduce you to other policymakers, they provide you with a platform to actually go and share what you do with other policymakers so that you can push the use of evidence in decision making even further to so many other policymakers. So what other lessons have we actually learned from the service? The demand exists. However, confidence comes from relevancy and timeliness, quality of the products, transparency, and accountability. So to maintain that demand, you really have to be transparent. You have to be relevant to the policymaker. Quality of the product has to be top-notch. From within Makerere University, we actually realized that the personnel needs for evidence are research methods and policy. So since you are going to do a lot of searching for evidence and appraising evidence, you must be well-grounded in research methods. You must know the policy of the land, so that you can actually be relevant to the policymaker when you're suggesting things. You should suggest things that fit within the policy. Communication skills are critical, very crucial, and then a critical understanding of the system that you are working within. Challenges is sustainability, human resource, and governance. It's very difficult for you to get resource that has all these skills. And when you get someone and actually train them, it is not unusual for them to move on to other things. Yeah, so human resource is a huge, huge challenge. So I'm going to move to the end of the presentation. When you compare rapid response service, the kind of questions that come from the national level versus the subnational level, you'll find that subnational level questions were mostly around implementation strategies. National level questions were generally distributed across the entire scope of the service. So it's very rare for you to get other questions that are not implementation at the subnational level. But they do happen because the subnational level has the mandate to pass ordinances, which are more or less policies or bylaws in nature, but it is really rare. Most of the times it will be implementation. The decision-making process at the subnational level, it was quite straightforward. You have very few people involved in the policy decision. At the national level, it is so complicated. Probably the Director General is going to ask a question. When you respond to the evidence, they're going to move it on to the permanent secretary to the minister to the cabinet before actually the decision is made. However, at the subnational level, you have 3 or 4 people seated in a room discussing this evidence and taking a decision there and then. At both levels, the evidence was actually used to stimulate discussion, inform decisions, incorporate into the decision or course of action, affirm an already made decision or course of action, or build confidence in the options that the individual have chosen. When it comes to evaluation of the service, at the subnational level, since the decision is very fast to make and it is mostly implementation, you can easily measure the impact before this was done and after it was done. At the national level, if a decision is taken 1 year after you provided the evidence, it even becomes more hard for you to actually identify where your evidence was incorporated in the decision-making cycle. However, use of evidence does not only mean that a policy decision is going to be made based on the evidence you provided. Mere discussing the evidence, merely the policymaker sitting down and actually using your evidence to inform their discussion and deliberate on things, even if they don't decide the way evidence has pointed them to decide, is in itself use of evidence. Yeah. So you'll find those that scenario a lot more common at the national level, less more common at the subnational level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Edward. We'll hand over to you very soon. I think Edward was top of his class and already commented on the synergies with the other presentations. So I just want to give a quick chance to Willem and Harsha both to respond if there's any synergies, and then we'll hand over to the wider crowd. So,
a quick one, I'll take 2 minutes. So what I realized is, what I should maybe also share, so we had on our platform, we're sort of working with the assumption that we have 2 constraints. One constraint is time, obviously, and the same Edward mentioned, but the other one is our mental capacities, actually, to be quite honest. In the same way that we need calculators to do many calculations, we are working with the assumption that that our brains may not be able to compute the news, the policies, the peer-reviewed evidence on a specific topic. It's a bit depressing, but that's one of the constraints we're trying to work with. And then what we're doing now, okay, let me also, just another preface to this. So when initially we looked at 4 universities' research on the SDGs in the institutional repositories published over a period of 4 years, we ended up with 621 articles. Then we updated our data harvesting tool, and now we're sitting with, I can't remember, something like 8,000, but a number, thousands of articles. So much so, and that we decided we're not going to link this now to our main website before we've not made these things more accessible. Concurrently with that, we got a grant from Microsoft to work on, let's say, artificial intelligence, machine learning type of solutions. We have a team of 2 data scientists, and now we've got our chair of data science on board. And what we're trying to do is, because we're focusing on the SDGs, we are trying to teach the machine SDG language. Because, I mean, let's say you type in a keyword and you get a list of 20 articles, so what? Because very often you're not really interested in an article of which the finding aligns directly with what you said, but there might be a small section in the article that's relevant, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs. All of us who do research know this. So we said maybe such a tool can actually not only help us to identify the articles, but also help us find the article, the parts of the articles that are relevant, and even synthesize, in terms of text summarization, those parts of the articles that might be relevant and give it to us in a slightly more sort of digestible format. So where we are now is we are training the machine on different data sets, because we had a conversation now at long last when our new chair of data science started. He did things in an hour that took us 3 months to do. I'm not joking. And the biggest thing that kept him back was the speed of our internet. So, so he had really no mental constraints. But we are training the machine now on all the voluntary national reviews that countries produce. That's basically the SDG report cards. We trained the machine obviously on our own tagging, which we did manually. And then you have different websites where they either have news stories or policy briefs or things, and even UN websites tag in terms of SDG. So we're currently training the machine on that. And then we can have a number of layers where you also bring in human beings. So we have the first, it's amazing, first session where the machine had to identify its own clusters of topics. I have 1 minute left, yes. And weirdly, at least it identified 19 clusters of topics, so not 17 like the 7 SDGs, even though I think the SDGs actually cover more than 17 topics, different conversation. And many of them already, at least 5 of those clusters already resemble SDGs. So we're playing around with this. If it works, it's going to be open access, obviously we'll share it, and I think that's a place. Hersha identified that labor-intensive phase of identifying the articles. I do think this machine learning thing could make that phase much, much easier, quicker, even if it's only giving you a much smaller list of articles than the human eye going through all of it. So, sorry, that's just what I wanted to add.
I just want to say that, in an event like this, it's also so unusual that we hear from academia, both sides, and then they gave us government a platform to actually be as an equal. And I think that's my point. There's a lot of us government officials sitting here, and a lot of us do this on a daily basis. And in our last 3 days together with Edward, we're trying to work out all this day-to-day work that we do. And then we still have to rapidly respond to some demand in the middle of all of that. How do you make sense of that madness? And I think this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to ask that if this is our daily work, then how do we draw from credible, relevant, useful, quality information that we can defend when we are putting it into a report or putting it up? That's what we're trying to do. So it's about improving public officials' capacity to do that.
Well, thanks once again to our speakers.